nombre del CIDE y de la División de Estudios Internacionales, les doy la bienvenida esta tarde al tercer panel de lo que es la conferencia Max Weber y las ciencias sociales en el siglo XXI, una conferencia organizada conjuntamente por el CIDE, y por el CIDE me refiero al profesor Álvaro Morcillo, que es profesor de la División de Estudios Internacionales, y el Colegio de México. Las sesiones de hoy tienen lugar aquí en el CIDE, las de mañana en el Colegio de México. Entonces, bueno, pues yo creo que este es un evento pues muy apropiado en este momento para festejar el centenario de Weber. Esta tarde vamos a escuchar, más bien, yo no voy a hablar, a nuestros ponentes hablar sobre la contribución de Weber a las relaciones internacionales. Por eso estoy yo aquí. Me presento, soy Lorena Ruano, directora de la División de Estudios Internacionales de aquí del CIDE. No estoy en el programa, entonces, bueno, me presento. Y lo que vamos a hacer es que le vamos a dar 20 minutos a cada uno de nuestros ponentes. Tenemos a Laurence McFalls y al profesor Álvaro Morcillo, que van a hacer sus presentaciones, y después vamos a tener los comentarios del profesor Stephen Turner y de Juan Espíndola, que también es profesor del CIDE, pero que está atorado en constituyentes. Entonces, yo espero que de aquí a que hablen los tres primeros, Juan Espíndola se pueda unir a las discusiones. Vamos a comenzar entonces por darle la palabra al profesor McFalls, que es el director del Centro Canadiense para Estudios Europeos y Alemanes en la Universidad de Montreal. Él obtuvo su doctorado por la Universidad de Harvard en 1990. Ha coeditado un libro que se llama Max Weber's Objectivity Reconsidered. La objetividad de Max Weber reconsiderada, revisada. Sus áreas de estudio son la unificación alemana, obviamente Max Weber, la intervención militar humanitaria, y con Mariela Pandolfi ha escrito extensivamente sobre lo que ellos llaman dominación terapéutica. Le voy a dar 20 minutos, tengo aquí una marimba que va a sonar en 20 minutos, voy a ser bastante talibán con el tiempo, porque ya estamos empezando tarde. Profesor McFalls. Adelante.
Okay, 20 minutes is a big challenge. The work I'm going to present to you this afternoon is based on the work that I've done with Mariela Pandolfi that Lorena just mentioned, where we've been studying the new forms of political authority on sites of humanitarian intervention. Today I'm not going to talk about that work per se, but rather the theoretical reflections that have arisen from that work. Our work now has turned from the periphery, where the European and northern powers generally have intervened in the name of good governance and whatnot, in a form of authority that we call therapeutic. Well, we've seen that since 2008, the periphery is now at the center, and Europe is sort of the theater of new forms of political authority. My reflections are based on an opportunistic, maybe abusive, perhaps productive, certainly dilettantish cross-reading of Weber and Foucault. And I say dilettantish advisedly because the hunt of dilettante is always better than anything a scientist could say. So from the outset, it would seem, especially from the perspective of international relations theory or theories of the state, that Weber and Foucault are very different thinkers, obviously. Weber, who has a very vertical, realistic, stato-centrist vision of politics with the centrality of violence as embodied in the role of the sovereign, and he's inspired, of course, classical realism. Whereas Foucault, his whole notion of biopower is horizontal, capillary forms of governmentality is obviously quite different, and has inspired sort of the opposite school in international relations of critical security studies through people like Didier Bigot and such. But of course, Weber and Foucault share many things, including their Nietzschean inspirations. Also, as we heard this morning, Weber really got off on art and sex. Well, so did Foucault, as we know. But that's not their only similarities. And this is a reference to the debates we had this morning. Both Weber and Foucault were horrible European ethnocentrists, whereas Kathleen Coyote-Lenne, who was one of the many people who have now seen a rapprochement between Weber and Foucault, has said they both practice a sort of methodological ethnocentrism. That is, they're primarily interested in Europe. Now, we already discussed this famous sentence from Weber's preface, which wasn't really the preface to the Protestant Ethic, but which was made into that by Talcott Parsons, this notion of the universal value of European history. But Foucault, we might say, in a more subtle manner, was just as much really only interested in discourses, techniques, and forms of power and truth that developed in the European scene. But as in this citation from Naissance de la vie politique, he was also very clear in identifying the role of Europe in the world and the connection between liberalism as a particular solution to the problems of the 18th and 19th century European state system and imperialism. That basically liberalism as a horizontal form of indirect government, or the conduct of conduct in Foucault's language, depended on Europe's ability to expand on a global scale. It depended on imperialism and, of course, on racism. So, in that sense, Foucault seems to be much more politically correct than Weber. So, what happens to the world when Europe's claim to universal validity no longer holds? What happens to the world politics when the liberal model that was centered in European North Atlantic world no longer dominates the planet? What happens when the chickens come home to roost and Europe suddenly finds itself at the mercy of the world? What happens when Europe becomes Argentina? Or Mexico, for that matter. Well, I won't be able to go into much detail to provide a full genealogy of the contemporary European crisis, because the chickens did come home to roost in 2008, and just at the discursive level, we can see in European politics today and the situation of Europe vis-a-vis the world, sort of confusion of different layers of discourse. And here I'm evoking the Foucauldian sort of genealogy of forms of government, where today reason of state has been revived in the language of geopolitics and war, renationalization, the rise of the right in Europe. Liberalism still remains strong discourse with the appeal to the market as the only source of possible truth, but more in a neoliberal form, where we recognize that markets are fragile and that they need expert guidance and authoritarian imposition. And as I will argue, Europe has become increasingly the laboratory or the site of a new form of governmental reason that I would call post-liberalism, characterized, among other things, by permanent crisis management. Again, I'm just going to rush through a whole bunch of characteristics of what I see to be the current situation of European politics, and sorry to generalize or universalize from the European case, I think what's happening in Europe today is nonetheless emblematic of what's the shape of politics to come around the planet. Specifically, there's the rise of therapeutic domination, which I'll explain in a minute, the depoliticization of the economy with the rise of non-responsible government, explicitly in Greece and Italy, but also, for that matter, in the form of the Grand Coalition in Germany even. There's the notion of a permanent state of exception everywhere. There's a temporality of urgency. Everything has to be done quickly. There's a general atmosphere of catastrophe, and you know, the world's about to come to an end, and that's a very good way to govern. I'll get back to these notions of discursive self-referentiality. It's a crisis because we say it's a crisis. All the crises today are self-created, self-perpetuated, and I would say that there's a sort of non-government by crisis currently. I could spend 3 hours to go into detail of this. Now, so far you said, where's the Weber in all this? Because this is all based on this barbaric synoptic table of all of Michel Foucault's work. And this is a very non-Foucauldian, anti-Weberian in the sense that, sort of pseudo-Hegelian in the sense that I'm suggesting here a kind of march of history from monarchism through absolutism, liberalism, neoliberalism, and post-liberalism. And I can't go through all of these phases, but just call your attention to the last row of post-liberalism, which I would like to argue is a new form of governmental reason characterized by its distinctive truth regime, particular forms of subjectivity, and a kind of post-political rationality of what I call regulated non-order. Now, what I mean by regulated non-order is that until very recently, our understanding of politics was to understand it as a quest for order, whether it be hierarchical or reciprocal, notion being that social orders that politics seek to create are coherent, they're integrated, that the political action as a whole is strategic vis-a-vis the ambition of creating some kind of order, whether it be the order of national assertion, the order of economic growth, the order of divine will, cultural hegemony, whatever. There's, up until recently, we understood politics as order. And what I would argue is that today, and in the European experience, testifies to the emergence of what I would call the episteme of post-politics understood as regulated non-order. That is, in which political action is uncoordinated, it's encapsulated, it's sectorial, fragmented, self-referential, and tactical. It's, again, as I said before, it's this notion of, it's basically a bunch of people running with their, like chickens with their heads chopped off, claiming to have the answers for all kinds of problems, and carving out little spheres of self-referential, self-satisfied government of crisis situations. Now, again, in 20 minutes, I can't even begin to justify all this.
I have 25 because Juan is not coming. So. So you can chill out now.
I'll breathe. Okay.
Yeah.
So, how do we conceive of politics or post-politics as sort of a non-government of non-order? Well, this is where our good old friend Max Weber comes back into the picture. And this is his description, among other things, of feudal patrimonialism. That is a form of non-order, or as he calls it, a chaos that is not reducible to the terms of the state. So Weber, this thinker that we associate with the reason of state, sovereign authority, vertical authority, violence on territory, etc., was quite capable. It offers us the tools also for thinking outside the box of the state, or thinking beyond politics as understood as a quest for order. Helps us think of how legitimate domination might look beyond or after the state. Because there's no back to the future. There's discourses of neo-patrimonialism, and we know that neoliberal privatization is also, in some senses, a patrimonialization of state authority. But I think we're looking at something new here, and specifically, I've coined this term that I called therapeutic domination, which we can understand intuitively as that which is the kind of, or metonymically, as the kind of authority that a doctor exercises over a patient. That is, in a time of crisis, or a time of urgency, or in order to prevent a crisis, the patient obeys the command of the doctor, who claims to be doing so on the basis of a treatment protocol, and of course with benevolent intent. Of course, all claims to legitimacy are claims of benevolence of some sort, even if the benevolence is, I must eliminate you because you are impure. Which, of course, is also part of therapeutic domination, in the sense that much of our contemporary politics has become a question of deciding who is worthy of treatment and who isn't. What are the elements of our societies, and this is sort of an accentuation of Foucauldian biopolitics, according to the definition you saw a few minutes ago, of how do we purge the human race of its unhealthy elements. Also the notion of iatrogenic resistance, but I won't develop that at all. So where does this fit with Weber's classic tripartite definition of legitimate domination? Well, as you all know, there's three forms of domination according to Weber, which we can graph out on two axes according to whether the domination or the claim to legitimate authority emanates from a person or emanates from a rule. So this is the personal, impersonal axis, and whether this takes place in a temporality of continuity or in a temporality of rupture, that is, whether it's ordinary or extraordinary. And so, you know, I don't think I need to rehearse this typology, except perhaps in underscoring that charismatic authority, in fact, does not describe order. The problem for Weber and charisma is that it's always the interruption of order, or the eruption into order of elements of disorder. This is revolution. Charisma is revolution. But what's missing? The empty square. So, you know, logically, again, this is, please, Weberians in the audience, I know this is completely contrary to the spirit of Weber to have this kind of dogmatic, deductivist typology. Nonetheless, I will do it. And that's where I fit in my therapeutic authority, a kind of impersonal authority, application of a treatment protocol, with in a time of rupture, of emergency, of disease, in the medical case. You can also assimilate it to scientific authority or permanent scientific revolution. Scientific method calls constantly our state of knowledge into question. And I could develop this further on the whole question of what is the status of truth and access to truth and the certainty of truth of different forms of government. But I won't do that here because it'll take me another 2 hours. What I will do is try to attach these different forms of legitimate domination to different modes of rationality. And this is where Weber sort of this building a bridge back to Foucault. How does Weber's typology of legitimate domination relate to different forms of political rationality? And as you can see from this chart, I've had enough time to study it, so now you know what it is. I can now sort of assimilate to each kind of legitimate domination appeal to particular forms of rationality, or motivation for action, or in some cases claims to truth. So in traditional authority, it calls on traditional habitual rationality or effective rationality. If we go on to charismatic authority, you see the ones that get blown up. And this is bureaucratic authority, which is based, the application of rules the validity of a rule is based in its continuity, so therefore there's a habitual or traditional element to that authority. And at the same time, it's the formal, instrumental rationality of application of rules that legitimates bureaucratic or legal rational rule. So what about my fourth category of therapeutic authority? Well, it appeals both to formal instrumental rationality, but it primarily appeals, and again I have to go into this in much greater detail, it is basically substantive rationality run amok. And I cannot illustrate this except sort of symptomatically in the discourses that have arisen around humanitarian intervention, the discourse of human rights. What are these human rights? These are the minimalist rights of life and survival. It's essentially an anti-politics. It's the irony. Weber wanted charisma to intervene into bureaucratic, democratic politics as a way of overcoming the absurdity of instrumental rationality that characterizes the iron cage. And so we need to have this eruption of substantive rationality into political decision-making through decisionism or through charismatic elements. But within therapeutic authority, there's sort of a reverse process where substantive rationality of saving life, which sort of becomes a minimalist, consensual value that now characterizes virtually all political action, which in the process of becoming a political action of saving the planet, saving the children, saving the sick, all of this salvationist discourse is also a therapeuticization, a medicalization. We have treatment protocols, so it becomes this strange blend of substantive and formal rationality. So this is the peculiar logic of contemporary post-politics, or post-liberalism as I would call it, that motivates... Almost out of time?
That's okay, you still have 5 minutes.
Okay. Here, this is my schematic representation of how you actually should be working with Weber. In the sense that what he was interested in is life conduct, Lebensführung. And well, how do you get there? There's the intrinsic logic of life spheres, like there's the intrinsic logic of the law, but of course there's the social carriers with their interests who have some sort of elective affinity with particular logics of life. And they do so within a particular historical context with particular technical means at their disposal. And you'll see here, this is where, again, Foucault and Weber converge. Intrinsic logic of life spheres refers to discourses or truth regimes. Social carriers, these are the practices, and the historical materialism, the technical means, these are the techniques and these all work in interaction to create life forms. And to sociologically anchor this new form of political reason that I've identified now through Weber and Foucault, we need to go back to Weber again and ask, well, who are the social carriers of this? And what forms of subjectivity emerge? So we have this post-political reason of therapeutic domination, which is, among other things, you can see it carried out in discourses of human security, or my favorite one is humanitarian war. I love that. And who are the people who carry this out? Well, it's a plural, autonomous core of experts with particular technical knowledge and power who have become detached, notably from the state institutions. Primarily, they're the new institutional form of their organization that allows them to defend their material and ideal interests as the non-governmental organization. And they go in the rotating door between NGOs and government and universities, etc. So there's this new elite core of experts who are all preaching their particular sectorial knowledge of how they're going to save the economy, how they're going to save your life, how they're going to save the planet, etc. And they do this in a new context of biomedical information technologies also instantaneous, real-time communications. All of these particular conditions of our contemporaneity allow this social class of experts without borders to act according to this logic, this survivalist logic of post-political therapeutic domination. And of course we have to situate, this is sort of a just blurted out a summary here of different conditions or contexts within which it's been possible for this new form of therapeutic domination to emerge, and yeah, that's what Weber and Foucault tell us about the present, and they're both dead white males.
Great. Fantástico, muy bien. Perfect. No usó todo el tiempo que tenía, así que felicidades. Ahora le voy a dar la palabra al profesor Álvaro Morcillo. Álvaro Morcillo es profesor de la División de Estudios Internacionales aquí en el CIDE. Él obtuvo su doctorado en Ciencia Política desde la Universidad Humboldt de Berlín. Ha publicado acerca de la coordinación en los estados europeos federales y también acerca de la recepción de Max Weber en las Américas. De hecho, probablemente ya vieron el folleto, va a salir el libro que él y Eduardo Weiss coordinan, publicado por el Fondo ahora en noviembre. Si no lo han visto, véanlo porque está muy interesante. Y bueno, pues además de todo ha organizado la conferencia de hoy. Así que le vamos a dar 25 minutos para que presente su trabajo, si la tecnología nos acompaña. ¿Sí? ¿Sí nos acompaña? Todavía no nos acompaña. Pero está bien. Y bueno, aprovecho que la tecnología todavía no está lista para comentarles que Juan Espíndola desafortunadamente no va a podernos acompañar hoy en la tarde, aparentemente. Entonces voy a repartir el tiempo que le estaba asignado entre los tres ponentes que tenemos y vamos afortunadamente a tener más tiempo para sus preguntas al final de las presentaciones, lo cual yo creo que es una fortuna. Seguimos en la batalla, en la tecnología. It's rather unwieldy. Y ahí vamos. Profesor Morcillo tiene la palabra.
Thank you, Lorena. What I'm going to do is to present summary of a paper I'm writing with Klaus Lichte from the University of Bremen. The structure of the presentation is very straightforward. I'm going to quickly go over some of Weber's basic concepts, which I'm going to use later on to discuss the way in which IR scholars study the state as a monopoly of violence, and afterwards I'm going to discuss the problem of global rationalization, mostly as it is presented by neo-institutionalists and sociological institutionalists. However, another way of putting the topic I'm going to discuss is like this. I'm going to present on how Weber is used, but it should not, and the other way around, on when and on occasions in which Weber is not used, but it should, because it will bring us some interesting insights. So, as I said, I will offer a brief discussion of Weber's basic concepts, because I'm going to use them later on. Domination, understood as the probability of a command being obeyed without the need of resorting to coercion. Association, which is usually translated as organization, understood here as a social relation whose rulings are enforced by a leader. The leader gives commands to the members and to the officials, the administrative card. So we have here three categories: the leader, the officials, which constitute administrative staff, and the regular members of the association. An important concept is the concept of statute, which means purposefully, that means rationally devised ruling of an association. And then I'm going to use two further concepts which are not employed so regularly, which are the ones of heteronomous association and the one of heterocephalous associations. The first one refers to associations whose statutes are dictated by another association. So the association doesn't have autonomy, it doesn't rule itself. In the case of an heterocephalous association, it's Weber actually. Weber refers to associations whose leader is appointed by another association. Why I want to use these concepts? Because I think that they are useful to better understand the state in a broader way. It's also useful to compare the state with other associations, with other organizations. The state is different as an association because of the threat of violence. The violence as a guarantee of the compliance of statutes. The interesting idea here is actually not the actual use of violence, but the threat of violence. And the state has another particular element, which is territory. There are many associations, but only few of them have a territorial dimension. However, I'm going to focus more on whether violence is really useful as a criterion to distinguish the state from other types of associations. Because in fact, we have many states, most of them conduct activities beyond the state frontiers, beyond its territory. When they act beyond the state frontiers, states cannot, in many cases, resort to the threat of violence, but nevertheless, they need to increase the probability of their rulings and statutes being implemented. So here is an example. I'm going to talk about a country called remote land. In remote land, donors are active in policy sectors and they negotiate legislative proposals with the local government, with the government of remote land. This is a regular situation when we think of development policy. If we look at more carefully at development policy, what we find is that the donor, which is an association, it can be a state, but it can also be an international organization or an NGO. The donor, in many instances, prepares the draft legislation, which is subsequently enacted and becomes a statute within the legal system of the recipient country. There is a negotiation, of course, but as I have written in the slide, the draft of the documents under discussion are regularly drafted by the donor. And the donor And this is a hypothesis which has not been explored, but the donor usually has much better resources in terms of its personnel. They have better qualified staff and they have more knowledge. I will come back to this issue later on. One interesting aspect is that the recipient country is not autonomous. For reasons that we are going to say in a minute, it has to accept the statutes which are being suggested by the donor country. The donor itself is usually bound in different respects. Donors have development policies which are specified in framework legislation back at home, and sometimes donors are also bound by international agreements like the Millennium Development Goals. And the aid granted by the donors is not just for, let's say, peripheral activities of the recipient state. In many cases, the aid targets the budget. So this negotiation between the donors and the recipient country is about the state budget, which is, we could argue, one of the cores of sovereignty. In the case of remote land, 10% of its budget comes from donors and 35% of public spending comes from donors. So what I want to do now is to put this in Bavarian terms. Since statutes are imposed from abroad, then we don't have a sovereign state, we have an heteronomous association. Foreign associations, donors, NGOs, donor states, IOs, foreign investors, will means of domination, money, as we saw, as I just discussed the budget, but also knowledge when they draft legislative proposals. And another important means of domination is probably the administrative staff, which is better trained in the donor country than in the recipient country. However, there are further nuances. As I said, the definition of the state broadly used in IR is that the state is an association which can't use the threat of violence. But in these situations of development aid and in many others, the states actually cannot and do not de facto use the threat of violence, because what will be the purpose of threatening with violence the country you are supposed to help? However, the policies of the donors can be more or less secure in terms of its implementation, because the donors have other means of dominations, money, knowledge, officials, etc. This opens the door to very interesting comparisons about the influence within a certain country of donor states, but also of foreign companies or NGOs, because from this point of view, they are just regular associations with a leader, an administrative staff, and means of domination. So this will suggest that in IR there should be a discussion on how to go beyond mainly legal definition of state, and how to use a more sociological, more empirically testable one. This is the other type of problem to which I want to apply the concept I introduced at the beginning of the presentation. Probably you have, some of you or many of you have heard of this concept of isomorphism, which relates to the similarity between a school system, social movements, industrial standards, or even scientific disciplines across the world. Neo-institutionalists and their IR counterparts like sociological institutionalism and constructivism, claim that the answer is that rationalized others, like professional associations, NGOs, and scientists, altruistically contribute to this world culture, which explains the isomorphisms. The individuals within these professional associations, NGOs, or scientific associations will do this contribution out of altruistic reasons. So at first it looks plausible you engage in a social movement, in the environmental movement, because you want to improve the world, and not necessarily because you want to pursue your own interest. We will see afterwards that is not so neatly the case. The main representative of neo-institutionalism or sociological institutionalism is John Mayer, who is already a senior scholar retired at Stanford, with a sizable school, informally called the Stanford School. According to him, NGOs, professional associations, consultants, etc., characterized by their altruism and the absence of petty interest, constitute expanded versions of orderhood that establish rational standards considered binding by most nation states. Nation states government will consider these rational standards as binding because they benefit from the prestige of science granted by these professional associations, by social movements linked to professional associations or think tanks, etc. I prefer to talk of internationalized rule or internationalized domination. In our view, what actually happens is that associations increase the predictability of individual actions and eventually lead to similarities across the world because they wield a domination thanks to officials, to availability of knowledge, and sometimes also of money. My case is an extreme case because I look at philanthropic foundations which are per definition supposed not to seek their own interests, but to try to improve the well-being of mankind or the advancements and diffusion of knowledge. Another related case, which is also quite extreme, at least in the way that John Mayer and his co-authors presented, is the case of professional associations, particularly professional associations of scientists. This is a very brief case study on the diffusion of modernization theory. The modernization theory, as formulated by political scientists and sociologists, was supported since the late 1950s by several philanthropic foundations. Part of this support included the establishment of small academic programs on the social sciences in different Latin American capital cities. It's interesting that when you look at the way these programs were established, you find some details that remind you of what we see in remote land. I mean, the drafts are regularly the drafts are regularly written by the officials of the foundations, not by the actual applicants. And they are molded beforehand and then sent to the trustees of the foundations, which are the ones who actually give the money. The directors of these social science centers across Latin America were either appointed by the foundations or they had to give their implicit consent. So these research centers could be considered heterocephalous associations. And the goals of the research center were those of the foundations, mainly to promote empirical social science, politically liberal, and to prevent the expansion of Marxist social science in Latin American university. In other words, these centers were heteronymous because these statutes were actually imposed from outside by the donors. So I'm going to the conclusions. As I said, not every state which is represented in the ONU is a sovereign state in the sense that it's capable of enacting its statute. In many cases, the legislation of sovereign states is actually imposed by third parties, donor countries, international organizations, etc. Interestingly, the relation between donors of different types and recipient countries, although in legal terms is a relation in between states, cannot be observed from the point of view of who uses the threat of violence in a more efficient way, because there is no opportunity to use violence when your goals are to contribute to the economic prosperity of the recipient country or the health of its citizens. The reason why we see these isomorphisms all across the world could be, it is, in my opinion, that there are associations like foundations, but also international organizations or NGOs with an international focus, and they contribute to to finance environmentalist movements worldwide, or to finance a certain type of social science research. And to finish, and this is probably the most interesting idea, is that there are not altruistic actors or altruistic associations in the international scene, because associations, if they are relevant, they must have statutes, they must make explicit their goals, and they must have a leader whose aim is to implement those goals. And even the goals originally were altruistic, once they are incorporated to statutes, they just become the interest of the association. This interest can be ideal or material, but there is actually an interest, and there is nothing like a rationalized other or an otherhood which is deprived of interest, or like Mayer says, petty self-interest. Thank you.
That was fantastic.
You can close.
Muy bien. Pues el paraíso de la moderadora. Acaban antes de tiempo. Muy bien. Voy a darle ahora la palabra a nuestro único comentarista, que es el profesor Stephen Turner. Él es profesor distinguido de filosofía en la Universidad del Sur de Florida. Sus libros incluyen una historia estándar de la sociología en Estados Unidos, The Impossible Science, también una teoría social de las prácticas, y muchos artículos y capítulos en varios libros acerca de Weber. Entre ellos se incluyen dos con Regis Factor, que se llaman Max Weber and the Dispute Over Reason and Value, a Study in Philosophy, Ethics and Politics, y Max Weber and the Lawyer as a Social Thinker, de 1994. Le voy a dar entonces 15 minutos al profesor Turner, porque sobró tiempo. Adelante, profesor.
Okay. So I'm not going to talk about the Laurence McFalls paper, although I may throw some things in about this, because actually I agree very much of what you had to say, and I sort of articulated that in another book called Liberal Democracy 3.0, which talked about the sort of role of experts in modernized or advanced, maybe we'll call it late liberal democracy. Okay, so I want to frame this Alvaro's paper in a slightly different way, and just give you some really ancient history from the 19th century. Before IR was a discipline, the subject of peace was largely taken up by people who called themselves sociologists, and especially early international sociology in the late 19th century, in the pre-academic phase, was especially concerned with reconciling Darwinism and socialism, and incidentally with world peace. So among the major figures that were involved in this were people like Kropotkin, and people were very interested in animal studies and anything that would give us clues to a way of using Darwinian concepts, which they wanted to accept, and coming up with either socialist or pacific outcomes. So in any case, what happened well into the pre-World War II period was many sociologists wrote on international relations, and they took all kinds of different sides on things, but a lot of it does prefigure some of the issues with in actual international relations. And in the early days of IR after World War II, there is some appeal to these sociological figures. Kenneth Waltz talks about Durkheim, Morgenthau, Weber, which is a big part of this story. So Morgenthau is really a founding figure for IR, and what's interesting about Morgenthau is he doesn't doesn't use Weber until the 5th edition of his major book, Politics and Nations, and so he doesn't present himself as a Weberian until much later in life, when he fesses up and says that that's where he got his inspiration for the political writings. But in any case, he constructs a kind of subset of what social theory, which he understands IR to be, and it's really organized around what he calls a standpoint, referencing sociology of knowledge of the 30s, and the standpoint is the responsible statesman. So it's an ideal type, but it's because we can tell what's going to happen in international politics. It has predictive value and also normative value as part of realism generally, because it tells you what to do, what the responsible statement must do in the face of international power politics or great power politics. Like Weber, he's a complete constructivist about the state and social entities. Doesn't have a concept of society or any collective concepts at all. They're just constructed fictions. But his focus is on the nation state because it's a focus on statesmen. And there's very little connection to these other sociological traditions except to reject any form of utopianism. Now, what's interesting about this, relevant to what follows, is that he does use some Weberian concepts. He writes about a lot of other topics as well. And he does use Weberian concepts, sociological concepts there. So in discussing Stalinism, he says, well, it's a combination of charisma and bureaucracy, which is kind of useful. So that's Morgenthau, but there's another route in which Weber gets inserted into this discussion, and that's in the post-war period when area studies programs become very important for the U.S. This really begins with World War II, where the Harvard University and some other universities, but mainly Harvard, are tasked with the job of preparing people to be in occupying armies in defeated countries. So, so the model was you had to train people in the culture and traditions of that country in order to actually effectively occupy your defeated enemies. Then when the Cold War started, this immediately turned to the problem of understanding Russia, so you get the Russian Research Center. And all of these efforts, they were somewhat eclectic, but Weber fits into a bunch of them, especially in terms of notions of development. So, and we begin to see Weber talked about as a theorist. The word theory is not one that Weber uses and was never used to apply to him until it gets Americanized and ideal types. All of a sudden, the ideal type of bureaucracy is now the theory of bureaucracy. The ideal type of charisma is now the theory of charisma. So we get the same thing in IR. All of a sudden, rather than a kind of ideal type of the great statesman or the responsible statesman, now we've got a theory of international politics. So this is but part of the reception included a big sanitization project. So the political writings especially were ignored, they were translated, they were overtly, explicitly dismissed. Also the methodological writings by some people like, say, Bendix. He didn't want to talk about that stuff at all. And a lot of Weber got slipped in without anybody noticing that it was Weber, and the Weber that did get taught was a very truncated, very sociological kind of Weber, essentially the kind that could be plundered to turn into theories of one kind or another. So, 70s and 80s, you get this revolution in Weber scholarship that I can tell you from personal experience, the people like Parsons and Bendix and Gunther Roth were eager to put down this rebellion. They didn't want any of this stuff published. You couldn't publish it in the US, and because they were always the reviewers. And at the time, and what it did was to reclaim the political writings and the political Weber. Now, later generations thought, well, why are you all so concerned with politics? But it had to do with the fact that it had all been suppressed. But also during this time, this idea of Weber as a theorist of modernity, which really spread to a lot of people because there was a kind of modernity problematic, even though Weber certainly wouldn't have used this language and talked this way at all. So the older kind of Weber, there's lots of history here that I won't bore you with, but all of these things continued especially in sociology, but stripped of their original content, the kind of thing you could boil down into a few pages in a textbook. Okay, so that's kind of the background. Now, what I was pointing out, which I think is an absolutely crucial, important problem that IR theory has not done a very good job in dealing with, is these new organizations. So you've got things that you can understand, like the EU, but it's very difficult to understand. It's got this treaty / commission structure, but it has real power. And these organizations like the World Bank, the IMF, and so on and so forth. So these are all very different organizations, and you can add to it NGOs and foundations as well. So it's very difficult to understand what these organizations are in classical IR terms, and certainly in classical Weberian terms. I'll get to that. So they're not conventional bureaucracies, and they're not even like normally managed organizations. So conventional management theory, which is about firms trying to make money, doesn't really help with them at all. And I think one of the important parts of this is that despite all of the oddities of these things, they do have to satisfy constituencies, and they need to generate legitimacy. And legitimacy is really important for these organizations because they have to get cooperation. And So legitimacy, rather than obedience, it's cooperation that they need. Okay, so let me just distinguish some different ways to go with Weber. So you can do like Morgenthau, take the real Weber and take it across this narrow bridge and look at a normal social form like the nation state and apply it and get interesting results. Great, that's a simple application. Then you've got these anomalous forms like these NGOs and so forth, and then you need to extend Weberian concepts such as legitimacy to see how it might apply in these new settings, or see what can be extended in various ways. Then there's an alternative, which I'm afraid I put John Mayer in, which is fake. I was going to call this faux Weber, but to be polite, I said neo-Weber. And so you get a substitute problem which alludes maybe to Weber. And when you apply it to the normal social forms like the nation state, you get a reformulation, but you don't really get anything great benefit from that. And when you apply it to these anomalous forms, I think you get a kind of loss of clarity about what you're really talking about. And I think I'll just point out some of the oddities of his formulation of these organizations. So in each case, though, we can use things like notions like legitimacy, rationalization, but what this suggests to me is that in going in any of these directions, we're looking at really different theoretical agendas with very different aims, and that's certainly true for Meyer. So, isomorphism. This is a concept that's a great 19th century concept. It comes out of Darwinism. It comes even earlier than Darwinism in Spencer. It's heavily in Giddings is a crucial founding figure of American sociology. Yeah. It's maybe implicit there in Weber, especially his notion that organizational forms of capitalism are exportable to other settings. So with Meyer, the question is, what does this really add? Is it the same as rationalization? Or does it tell us something actually new? So I guess my thesis would be that there's more stuff in Weber that could be used by, this is Alvarez's thesis, this is my comments. More in Weber could be used by our IR, but I think that it's important to connect them up to these traditional Weberian agenda of clarity and understanding. So there's a lot we can ask about, okay, what is the role of the leader of an organization like the World Bank? You know, what is the model for Christine Lagarde, for example? And there are new kinds of international organizations, and they need new attention and new models, absolutely. But I think that some of these traditional Weberian themes are actually even more important. And a good example is the idea that NATO can legitimate invading countries far away. Let's talk about heterocephalus. It's absolutely weird, except if you think of, well, NATO has a certain kind of legitimacy that it can parlay into these kinds of actions. And, okay, so then the point that these are not sovereign but heteronomous associations is absolutely crucial. So how about all of this stuff relate? That yes, there is a kind of numerical codification that's part of most of these international ventures, and it is a question of why. I think that most of these organizational sort of evaluation mechanisms are actually the common denominator rather than anything like altruism. And if we get Weberian about this and look at in terms of the actual careers of people in these organizations, altruism has nothing to do with it. There's a career path. foundation for foundation people. They advance by inventing new forms of philanthropy, and they work with this distinction between philanthropy and charity. So philanthropy is designed to be leverage. You put in a certain amount of money, and the Rockefeller Foundation even said 10%, in order to get other people to commit money, and notably states. So you're trying to leverage your assets, and people who are really good about that rise very quickly. So I will worry about that. But I think the important part is that to understand the importance of legitimacy with NGOs. In cases where legitimacy collapses, which happens pretty often with NGOs, they can't get cooperation anymore. And it's almost a normal cycle for NGOs to get involved with governments, and then something bad happens, and they lose that cooperation because they are delegitimated for various kinds. And I think that's actually the story of the Rockefeller Foundation in Mexico, which started out with this huge success with yellow fever, and then built on it, and then bad things happened, and they had to withdraw completely. So I think legitimacy crises are a really important notion, and then preserving legitimacy then becomes an important problem for this NGO leader. So anyhow, I won't give you any more of this lengthy discussion, but I think if I were being Bavarian about this topic, that's the direction I would go.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Let me see. Thank you very much, Professor Turner.